Clear the table, Emma, and don't sit down until everything is done.
Of course.
Of course. What's this?
Mom, you want to tell him?
At 12:14 on Thanksgiving Day, my sister-in-law ordered me to clear the table and warned me not to sit down until every dish was washed. 20 minutes later, her husband, my older brother, opened a plain envelope beside the turkey and discovered that the house he had been calling his future home was no longer his to plan around. He thought I had taken it from him. But the real shock was not hidden in those papers. It was in the 5 quiet words my mother finally said out loud. Before I tell you what those words were, hello, everyone. My name is Emma Carter, and this happened to my family in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. By 5 that morning, my mother's house smelled like onions, melted butter, and the cinnamon I had mixed into the sweet potatoes. The windows above the kitchen sink had turned cloudy from the heat. Every counter was crowded with bowls, pans, measuring cups, and folded recipe cards covered in my mother's handwriting. Before I continue, please tell me where you are listening from. What city or country are you in? Leave a comment below, because I truly love seeing how far these stories travel and how many places our community reaches. My mother, Margaret Carter, had been awake since 4. She was 71 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and more stubborn than anyone I had ever known. Every Thanksgiving, she cooked as if feeding 14 people was still something her body could easily handle. It did not matter that her knees hurt. It did not matter that doctor had told her to rest more. It did not even matter that only 6 people were coming that year. Thanksgiving, in her mind, was not a meal. It was a responsibility. I arrived at 4:30 with coffee, 2 bags of groceries, and a promise that I would do the heavy work. Mom was already peeling potatoes. I asked why she had not waited for me. She smiled and said she had waited. She could have started at 3. That was my mother. I helped because I always helped. Nobody asked me to come before sunrise. Nobody thanked me for remembering the extra butter or checking whether the turkey had finished thawing. I simply noticed what needed to be done, and then I did it. For most of my life, I had believed that was love. Maybe part of it was love. But another part was a habit I had learned so early that I no longer saw it clearly. Daniel, my older brother, was the person our family celebrated. I was the person our family depended on. Daniel was 40, 3 years older than me. He lived in Nashville with his wife, Vanessa, and their 17-year-old son, Mason. He sold medical equipment and spoke with the confidence of a man who always expected people to listen. When Daniel entered a room, everyone adjusted around him. When I entered a room, people handed me something. If Mom needed a ride, a bill checked, or a repair arranged, everyone called me. I lived only 20 minutes away, and I loved her, so helping made sense. But little by little, it became my assigned place. Daniel called each Sunday and occasionally sent flowers. I drove Mom to surgery, stayed beside her bed, and handled everything afterward. Yet when relatives asked how she was doing, Daniel always answered first. That morning, as I stirred the sweet potatoes, Mom stood beside the stove, making gravy. Her hand trembled slightly when she lifted the spoon. I told her to sit down. She said she was fine. I turned off the burner, took the spoon from her hand, and pointed toward the chair near the breakfast table. She gave me a tired look, but she sat. For a few minutes, the kitchen was quiet, except for the scrape of my spoon against the pan and the low sound of the television in the living room. The local parade coverage had started. Mom watched me from her chair. Then she asked whether I had brought the envelope. I stopped stirring. I told her it was in my purse. She nodded, but she did not look relieved. She looked afraid. That envelope had been sitting in my home office for 9 days. It contained copies of documents that Mom had signed in the office of Rebecca Lawson, an estate attorney in Columbus. The original papers were already filed and secured. The envelope was not needed for anything official. It was there because Mom had decided that Daniel needed to be told in person. I asked if she was certain she wanted to do it that day. Mom looked toward the dining room where my father's old walnut table had been extended with 2 extra leaves. She said there would never be a good day. I knew she was right. Still, I wished she had chosen another time. A quiet Monday, perhaps. A short phone call. Any moment that did not involve a turkey, a holiday, and 30 years of family expectations sitting down together. But the choice was hers. That mattered more than my comfort. The story of the envelope had begun 11 months earlier, on a freezing night in January. Mom had called me at 2:17 in the morning. Her voice sounded weak and far away. She said she had gone downstairs for water, felt dizzy, and sat on the kitchen floor because she was afraid she would fall. I drove to her house in my pajamas under a winter coat. The roads were covered with ice. When I arrived, she was still on the floor, leaning against a cabinet. The emergency room doctor said she had an irregular heartbeat and severe dehydration. She stayed in the hospital for 3 nights. Daniel flew in on the second afternoon, took 2 photographs with Mom, spoke to the doctor for 7 minutes, and left the next morning because he had an important meeting. I took unpaid leave from work for the rest of the week. After Mom came home, I began organising the paperwork she had ignored for years. Insurance forms were mixed with grocery coupons. Tax records were stored in 3 different closets. My father's death certificate was inside an old cookbook. One Saturday, I found a folder marked PR Pa, and while inside was a will written more than 20 years earlier, when Dad was alive and Daniel and I were both still married, the document left everything to Dad. If Dad died first, the remaining estate would be divided between Daniel and me. But the will had never been updated after Dad's death. The house deed was still in Mum's name, which was fine. There were no clear instructions about what would happen if she became unable to manage her affairs. I explained what I had found. Mum stared at the folder for a long time. Then she admitted something that surprised me. Daniel had been asking questions about the house. At first, his questions had sounded harmless. How old was the roof? Did the furnace still work well? Was the property tax high? Then his questions changed. He asked whether Mom really needed 4 bedrooms. He asked how much the house might be worth in 5 years. He mentioned that Mason could attend college in Ohio and live there. He talked about opening the kitchen wall and turning Dad's workshop into a guest suite. Mom had laughed the first few times. Then she had stopped laughing, but she had never told him to stop. I asked why. She said Daniel became difficult when people challenged him. That sentence stayed with me. Daniel did not shout often. He did not need to. He used disappointment like a locked door. If Mom disagreed with him, he ended the call early. If I questioned a family plan, he called me sensitive. If anyone resisted Vanessa, she became cold and distant until the rest of us apologised, just to make the room comfortable again. For years, we had called that keeping the peace. In truth, we were keeping Daniel comfortable. I told Mom she should speak to an attorney. I made it clear that I was not asking her to leave the house to me. I did not want that question hanging between us. I only wanted her to understand her choices and make a plan while she was healthy enough to decide for herself. 2 weeks later, we met Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca was calm, direct and careful. She asked Mom to explain what she wanted without looking at me. Then she asked me to leave the room for part of the meeting. I respected that. In fact, I was grateful for it. Nobody would ever be able to say I had answered for Mom. Afterward, Rebecca explained the basic plan with Mom's permission. Mom would create a revocable living trust. The house would be titled in that trust, with Mom serving as trustee and beneficiary while she was alive. She would keep full control. She could live there, sell it, change her instructions, or cancel the trust if she wished. If illness ever prevented her from managing things, a successor trustee could pay taxes, arrange repairs, and protect the property for her benefit. Mom chose me as the successor trustee. That did not make the house mine. It made me responsible for following her written instructions. The final plan also said that no child, grandchild, or relative could move into the house, renovate it, borrow against it, or treat it as an inheritance while Mom was alive. After her death, her debts and final expenses would be paid. Then the remaining estate would be divided according to the instructions she had chosen. Rebecca asked Mom if anyone had pressured her. Mom said yes. My heart stopped for a second. Then Mom added that the pressure had not come from me. It had come from years of Daniel speaking as if her future had already been arranged. Rebecca wrote something in her notes. That was the moment I understood that this was bigger than paperwork. Mom was not choosing one child over another. She was reclaiming the present from people who were already dividing up her future. The process took months. The attorney confirmed that Mom understood every choice. The deed, accounts, insurance, and new instructions were reviewed carefully. I drove and carried folders. Every decision came from Mom. Daniel knew none of this because the plan concerned her private affairs. Still, the secret grew heavier. At a July barbecue, Daniel told our cousin Patrick that he would replace the porch railing when the house was his. Mom heard him but stayed silent because she did not want to ruin the afternoon. In September, the roof leaked. I arranged the repair with Mom's approval. Daniel called and said I should have consulted him because major work affected everyone. When I asked who everyone was, he had no answer. I ended the call, and although my hands shook afterward, I knew something in me had begun to change. By October, the trust was complete. The updated deed had been recorded. The new will, financial power of attorney, and healthcare instructions were signed. Mom kept the originals in a secure place. Rebecca gave us certified copies of the most important pages. I thought Mom might finally feel calm. Instead, she began worrying about telling Daniel. She suggested mailing him a letter. Then she worried he would call immediately, and she would be alone. She considered waiting until after Christmas. Then Daniel announced that he and Vanessa might stay for a week at Christmas because they wanted to measure the upstairs rooms. That was when Mom chose Thanksgiving. She said she wanted no more measuring. On the Tuesday before the holiday, I placed the copies in a plain cream coloured envelope. I did not write Daniel's name on it. I did not seal it. There was nothing dramatic about it. Yet I slept badly for 2 nights because I knew what it represented. It represented a boundary. In our family, boundaries were treated like accusations. Thanksgiving morning moved forward anyway. At 7, I made the stuffing. At 8, Mom shaped the rolls. At 9, I persuaded her to rest for 20 minutes while I cleaned the counters. At 10:30, the turkey was browning beautifully and the worst of the work was done. Daniel and Vanessa arrived at 11:15. Their son Mason came in first and hugged Mom. He was a good kid, quiet, thoughtful, and often uncomfortable when his parents took control of a room. He carried in a pumpkin pie from a bakery. Daniel followed with 2 bottles of wine and the energy of a guest arriving at a catered event. He looked around the kitchen and said everything smelled amazing. Then he asked whether the roof repair had a warranty. He had been inside the house for less than a minute. I told him the paperwork was in Mom's file. He said he would need a copy. Mom pretended not to hear. Vanessa entered last. She wore cream-coloured pants, a soft grey sweater, and shoes that had never met a kitchen floor before. She kissed the air beside Mom's cheek and placed her purse on the only empty chair. She asked what she could do to help. Before either of us could answer, she said she was terrible in the kitchen and did not want to get in the way. Then she poured herself a glass of wine. I kept working. At 11:45, my Aunt Linda and Cousin Patrick arrived. They brought green bean casserole and a bowl of cranberry salad. Linda immediately started carrying serving dishes into the dining room. Patrick opened the wine and talked with Mason. For a short time, everything felt almost normal. The turkey came out at noon. The rolls were covered with a clean towel. The dining table looked like a photograph from a holiday catalogue. Mom had used her white dishes with a thin gold edge. Dad's old carving knife rested beside the turkey platter. Sunlight came through the front windows and made the glasses shine. I remember looking at that table and thinking how strange it was that a room could appear so peaceful while every person inside it was carefully avoiding something. Mom was tired. I could see it in the way she leaned one hand against the counter. I told her to sit at the table while I finished carrying in the food. She said she should clear the mixing bowls first. Before I could answer, Vanessa looked across the kitchen at me. She said very casually that I could clear the table after dinner and that I should not sit down until every dish was done. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. I asked what she had said. Vanessa took a sip of wine. She said Mom should not have to worry about clean-up. Since I knew where everything belonged, I could handle it. Then she repeated that I should finish the dishes before sitting with everyone in the living room. The room went quiet. What made it worse was not the order itself. It was how natural it sounded to her. She spoke as if my work had already been assigned, as if she had the authority to decide when I rested in my mother's home. I looked at Daniel. He was checking something on his phone. I looked at Aunt Linda. She stared down at the casserole in her hands. Then I looked at Mom. Mom had already reached for a stack of dirty preparation plates. She was going to help me obey. Something inside me became very still. I caught her gently by the wrist and told her to leave the plates where they were. Mom looked confused. I had spent years mistaking peace for safety. I thought that if I stayed agreeable, nobody could accuse me of causing trouble. I thought being useful protected my place in the family. Standing there in that hot kitchen, after 7 hours of work, I finally saw the truth. My silence had never protected me. It had only made my labour easier to expect. I dried my hands on a towel, walked into the dining room and took the plain envelope from my purse. I placed it beside the turkey platter. Daniel noticed it immediately. He asked what it was. I told him to open it. Mom came into the room behind me. Her face had gone pale, but she did not stop me. Everyone sat down slowly. Nobody reached for food. Daniel picked up the envelope before anyone else could touch it. He pulled out the documents and read the first page. His expression changed. He read the first line again, then the second. His chair slammed backward as he stood. His knee struck the underside of the table, making the glasses shake. He demanded to know what he was reading. No one answered. He looked directly at me and said I had transferred the house. I told him Mom had placed her house into her own revocable trust. He waved the papers in the air. He said the deed had changed and my name appeared as successor trustee. I explained that a successor trustee does not own the house. Mom remained in full control. I would have authority only if she became unable to manage her affairs or after her death, and even then I would be legally required to follow her written instructions. Daniel did not want an explanation. He wanted the future he had imagined. He asked whether I had known about the trust. I said yes. He said I had let him believe the house would be his. That sentence almost made me laugh. Not because anything was funny. I nearly laughed because it revealed how completely he had confused our silence with his permission. I told him I had not made him believe anything. He turned to Mom. His voice changed. It became softer, wounded, almost childlike. He asked how she could do this without talking to him. Mom lowered herself into her chair. For a moment, I feared she would retreat. I feared she would apologise, blame the attorney, or say I had pushed her. Instead, she looked at Daniel and said the 5 words I had been waiting months to hear. "It is still my house." Daniel stared at her. Vanessa asked why Mom would need a trust if nobody was trying to take anything. Mom turned toward her. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She said that people had discussed her rooms, her roof, her property value, and their future renovations while she was still alive and sitting beside them. She said she was tired of hearing her home described as if she had already left it. Nobody spoke. Mom continued. She said the trust protected her. It made her instructions clear. It allowed someone she trusted to help if she became sick. It also made one fact impossible to misunderstand. The house belonged to her for as long as she wanted it. Daniel asked why she had chosen me as successor trustee. Mom answered that I knew where the tax records were. I knew the repair companies. I knew her doctors, her insurance information, and her monthly expenses. I had been doing the work for years. Daniel said that was because he lived 3 states away. Mom said distance explained absence. It did not create authority. That sentence landed harder than anything I could have said. Vanessa folded her arms. She asked whether I had convinced Mom that Daniel wanted to force her out. Told her no one had said that. Vanessa said the whole situation felt suspicious. I answered that Mom had met privately with an independent attorney. She had been evaluated, advised, and given months to consider her decisions. The trust was revocable, which meant she could change it. No property had been gifted to me. Then I said something I had practiced with Rebecca. If Daniel had legal questions, he could hire his own attorney, but he could not interrogate Mom at her Thanksgiving table. Daniel looked at Aunt Linda as if expecting support. Linda slowly set down her fork. She said she had heard him call the upstairs bedroom Mason's future room at the July barbecue. She had thought it was disrespectful then, and she thought it was disrespectful now. Daniel's face reddened. He said everyone was turning against him over a harmless conversation. Patrick spoke next. He reminded Daniel that he had also talked about replacing the porch and removing Dad's workshop. Daniel said those were only ideas. Mom asked why he had ideas for a house he did not own. Again, the room became silent. The turkey sat untouched in the centre of the table. The gravy had begun to form a thin skin. Steam no longer rose from the sweet potatoes. I could hear the old clock ticking in the living room. For years, Daniel had been the person everyone followed. He spoke loudly. He made plans. He chose restaurants, holiday schedules, and family gifts. When Dad died, Daniel stood at the funeral home and answered questions that should have been directed to Mom. I had told myself that he was simply confident. Now I understood that confidence without correction can slowly become entitlement. Daniel folded the papers and pushed them back into the envelope. He accused me of planning everything behind his back. I told him I had helped Mom organise her affairs. That was all. He said I had always resented him. I asked him to name one thing I had taken from him. He opened his mouth but did not answer. I told him the house had never belonged to him. Mom's decision had not removed something from his hands. It had removed an assumption from his mind. Mason was staring at the table. I felt sorry for him. None of this was his fault. Daniel noticed and said we were embarrassing him in front of his son. Mason finally looked up. He said, quietly, that he had never asked for a room in Grandma's house. Daniel turned toward him. Mason added that he planned to attend college in Tennessee. He did not want anyone making plans around him. For the first time all day, Daniel had nothing to say. Mom reached for the carving knife. Her hand was still shaking, so I asked if she wanted me to carve the turkey. She smiled and said yes. That small question mattered. I asked. She chose. I helped. We began eating. The meal was not comfortable. Nobody pretended it was. Conversation came in short, careful pieces. Aunt Linda complimented the rolls. Patrick asked Mason about school. Mom ate only a little. Daniel barely touched his plate. Vanessa drank more wine than she ate food, but something had changed. For once, the discomfort did not belong only to me. I had spent years absorbing every awkward moment so everyone else could enjoy the holiday. That day, I let the truth remain on the table with us. Halfway through dinner, Daniel asked to see the full list of instructions in the trust. Mom said no. He looked shocked. She explained that he had been given the pages relevant to the house and her control of it. The rest of her estate plan was private. She would share more if and when she chose. Daniel said family should not keep secrets. Mom looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked whether he shared every bank statement, insurance policy, and business plan with her. He said that was different. Mom said it was different only because he considered his privacy normal and hers suspicious. I had never heard her speak that way. Maybe she had never heard herself speak that way either. Vanessa pushed her plate away. She said they had driven 6 hours to be treated like strangers. Mom replied that guests do not arrive and plan renovations. Aunt Linda covered a smile with her napkin. I looked down at my plate because I was afraid I might smile too. Daniel asked whether the final estate would still be divided equally. Mom's face changed. The courage was still there, but now it was mixed with disappointment. She told him that the purpose of the meeting was to protect her life, not to provide him with an estimate of his inheritance. Then she said if his first concern was what he received after she died, he had learned nothing from the papers. Daniel stood again. This time he did not raise his voice. He said he needed air and walked out the front door. Mason remained at the table. Vanessa looked at him and told him to get his coat. He said he had not finished eating. She repeated herself. Mom told Vanessa that Mason was welcome to finish Thanksgiving dinner if he wanted. Vanessa's expression tightened. Then she walked outside without him. Mason ate another roll. I will always remember that roll. It was such a small act, but it felt like the first independent decision anyone in Daniel's immediate family had made all day. 10 minutes later, Daniel came back inside alone. His face was calmer, but his eyes were hard. He told Mason they would leave after dessert. Mom said they were welcome to stay as long as they could be respectful. Daniel did not respond. After the meal, I stood and carried my own plate into the kitchen. Then I returned to the dining room and sat beside Mom. I did not begin clearing the table. Mom did not move either. Vanessa looked from the plates to me. I could see her remembering what she had said earlier. Clear the table. Do not sit until every dish is done. No one repeated those words. For several minutes, the dishes remained exactly where they were. Then Aunt Linda carried 2 plates to the kitchen. Patrick gathered the glasses. Mason picked up the serving spoons. Finally, Vanessa stood and began stacking dishes herself. Nobody applauded. Nobody gave a speech. There was no dramatic apology. That was probably more honest. I joined the cleanup after I had finished my coffee, not because Vanessa ordered me to, and not because the room could not survive without my labour. I helped because 5 other people were helping too. The difference may sound small. It did not feel small. Daniel and Vanessa left before the pie was served. Mason hugged Mom and whispered something I could not hear. Later, Mom told me he had said he was glad she kept her house. Daniel did not hug her. At the door, he told me we would talk soon. I said we could talk when he was ready to speak respectfully. He stared at me as if I were a stranger. Maybe, in that moment, I was. I was no longer the sister he could assign work to, blame quietly, or dismiss as emotional. I had not become cruel. I had simply become visible. After they drove away, Mom sat at the kitchen table while Linda and Patrick packed leftovers. The house felt unusually large. Mom asked if she had ruined Thanksgiving. I told her the argument had not created the problem. It had revealed it. She began to cry. Not loudly. My mother rarely did anything loudly. Tears slipped down her cheeks while she twisted a corner of her napkin between her fingers. She said, she should have corrected Daniel years earlier. She should have spoken when he called the guest room his son's room. She should have stopped Vanessa from ordering me around. She should have thanked me more. I reached across the table and held her hand. Her fingers were cold. She whispered that she should have said something sooner. I told her yes. It was not cruel. It was simply true. Then I told her something else. Speaking late was still better than never speaking at all. Mom squeezed my hand. That evening, after everyone left, I checked the stove, put the leftovers in the refrigerator, and carried the trash to the garage. Old habits do not disappear in one afternoon. I still noticed everything that needed to be done. But before washing the last roasting pan, I asked Mom whether she wanted to leave it until morning. She looked surprised. Then she laughed and said the pan had waited all year. It could wait one more night. We left it in the sink. 2 days later, Daniel called me. I almost did not answer. When I did, he sounded controlled and formal. He said he had spoken to a friend who knew something about trusts. He now understood that I did not own the property. It was not an apology. It was a correction to an accusation. I told him I was glad he understood. He asked whether I thought Mom was mentally competent. I felt anger rise in me, but I kept my voice steady. I said her attorney had taken every reasonable step to confirm that she understood her choices. I also reminded him that questioning her competence simply because he disliked her decision was deeply unfair. He said he was only protecting her. I asked what he was protecting her from. He said me. There it was. The accusation I had known would come. I told him that if he genuinely believed Mom was being exploited, he should speak to a qualified attorney and present evidence. But if he only wanted me to surrender responsibility so he could control the house, the conversation was over. He went quiet. Then he asked why I had always needed to make him look bad. I told him I had spent most of my life doing the opposite. I had covered his absences, softened his words, explained his behaviour and carried responsibilities without naming them. I had protected his image so well that even he believed it. Daniel ended the call. This time my hands did not shake. For 3 weeks, Daniel did not contact Mom. Each Sunday, she kept her phone near her chair and pretended not to notice when it stayed silent. I wanted to rescue her from that pain by calling him. I did not. Daniel was responsible for the distance he had created. Mason called instead. He asked for her roll recipe, then called again about Dad's old camera. Before Christmas, he sent her a card saying he hoped she always felt safe in her own home. Mom placed it on the mantel. Daniel finally called on Christmas Eve. He apologised to Mom for speaking about the house as if it already belonged to him. He admitted that he had confused being the oldest son with being in charge. Mom told him the family did not need a person in charge. It needed adults who respected one another. It was not a miracle or a complete repair. It was progress. Over the next few months, Mom began asking for my help instead of assuming I would give it. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said I could come another day. The first time I declined because I had dinner plans. She simply told me to have fun. I sat in my car afterward and cried because I had expected guilt. Not understanding. Daniel joined appointments by video when Mom invited him. He stopped requesting every repair bill. Vanessa never apologised for the dishes, but I learned that I did not need her apology to change my behaviour. Her understanding was not permission I needed. Nearly a year after the Thanksgiving envelope, Mom asked if I was still coming for the next Thanksgiving. We were standing on her front porch. The wooden railing Daniel once planned to replace had been repaired and freshly painted. Mom had chosen the colour herself, a deep blue that Dad probably would have hated and she absolutely loved. I looked through the front window toward the dining room. I remembered the dirty dishes. I remembered the chair where I had been expected to wait while everyone else rested. I remembered the envelope beside the turkey and the sound of Daniel's chair hitting the floor. I told Mom I would come if I was invited. She nodded. Then, after a pause, she said I was invited as her daughter, not as her worker. I smiled. That Thanksgiving, I arrived at 9 instead of 4:30. Mom had ordered the turkey from a local restaurant. Daniel brought the potatoes. Vanessa brought 2 pies and, without being asked, a pair of rubber dishwashing gloves. When dinner ended, we all cleared the table. It was not perfect or polished, but it was honest. Before dessert, Mom said she was thankful to still be here to make her own choices. Daniel agreed. Then he told me he had never understood how much I handled because I always made it look easy. I said it had not been easy. He nodded and said he knew that now. It could not erase the past. It was real. For most of my life, I believed my value came from how much inconvenience I removed for others. I was proud of being reliable, and I still am. Caring for people can be a beautiful form of love, but love without respect can slowly turn into expectation, and expectation without gratitude can make a person disappear. That first Thanksgiving, I thought the trust documents were the centre of the story. They were not. The real change began when Mom said, "It is still my house." Those words were about more than property. They meant she was still alive. She was still capable. She still had the right to choose what happened in her home, with her money, and in her future. My change began a few minutes earlier when I took my hand off the dish towel and refused to accept an order that treated me like hired help. That choice was about more than dishes. It meant my time belonged to me. My care was something I could offer, not something others could claim. And being needed was not the same as being valued. I had spent years trying to prove that I deserved a seat at the family table. I finally understood that I should never have had to earn it by remaining on my feet. If you recognise yourself in my story, I want you to remember this. You can be kind without being invisible. You can help without surrendering every boundary. You can love your family and still the truth about how they treat you. Sometimes a boundary does not destroy a relationship. Sometimes it gives that relationship its first chance to become honest. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can place on a holiday table is not an envelope, a legal document, or even a perfect meal. Sometimes it is the simple decision to sit down. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. If it touched you or reminded you of something in your own life, please share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know what you would have done in my place. Please like this video, share it with someone who may need this message, and subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video.